Hello and welcome back to Ride Rescue. In this episode of the Camaro build, I need to sand all of the paint on this. This is the true meaning of color sanding. You hear a color sanding term thrown around a lot with clear coats. Well, when you're color sanding a clear coat, you're not sanding the color. If you do start getting color showing up in your sand scratch, that means you've gone through the clear coat and you're picking up the color. Well, this is a standard single stage paint, and with single stage paint, the old days, that was the term. You color sand, you're sanding the top finish, you're flattening it out, and you're making it smooth. Well, on this Camaro with a 35-year-old paint job, the finish has oxidized and it's discolored and it's got real porous, so you need to knock that off. So this isn't one of those where I'm color sanding to smoothen it, I'm color sanding and to bring the color back. There's a lot of grit and discoloration that just isn't coming out anymore, and the owner of the car, he wanted a complete repaint because he thought the paint was ruined, and he's had people tell him, well, this paint is shot, you need to repaint it. I convinced him, let's keep this old look, this character of the car. We'll touch that all up, and that's what I did in the last video. Now I need to color sand it and smooth it all out, smooth out those chips that I've built up with paint, and get rid of all this grunge that is sitting on the surface and bring that vibrant color back. Now that I have the car out in the light, you can see where I've color sanded this panel. You see it's more bright, and this other is just so dull, and my handprints left dirty handprints that don't wash off. It's just such a poor surface that needs to be sanded away. And then these areas that I've touched up, hopefully I'll be able to sand those to the point where they will just blend in. I mixed up just a little bit of soap and some water that I can spray on as I sand. Typically I'd use a 1000 grit sandpaper, and I would put it on a block to color sand a car. But this paint is so old, and with it being a lighter color, I can just hand sand it and I'll be fine. And then once I hit it with the buffer, it'll smooth it right out. I don't have to worry about taking out any orange peel. The orange peel has been long since rubbed away. So it's already glassy smooth. And when this was painted 35 years ago, this was color sanded and buffed. So that when it was first initially color sanded, it was to get out all of that orange peel and just make it really flat. So like I say, it's not really necessary to do it again. I'll just hand sand it. What I've got is a 1000 grit sandpaper, and I've got a 3000 grit sandpaper, and then a 5000 grit. And I'll start with an area here just so we can see how much it rejuvenates the brilliance of the color. I want to take extra care not to sand off any edges. Basically what I'm after is just to clean it in a way. I'm cleaning it with sandpaper. Really watch, you can see some scratches and some discoloration, like bird poop or something like that that has damaged the surface. Just see one like that and just put a little extra muscle into it and sand it away. You can really see the haziness right along here where I haven't really sanded that well, and you can see the dark edges. So when paint has gotten this far, it's a pretty easy guide to follow. and then I'll just go back, like I say, and sand with the 3000 and the 5000 to get rid of the 1000 grit sand scratch, which it's not likely there is any, but if you really look, I don't know if it shows up in the video, I hope it does, you can see the sand scratch. Very, very fine, but the other sanding grits will take that all out. Just to get rid of that discoloration around the edges. And this is where you have to, again, be really careful not to sand through. I ended up going through it right there. And I just barely, gently rubbed on it, so it doesn't take much. If the paint's thin, you're going to go through it. Okay, any place like that where I go through, I have the touch-up paint. I'll just touch that up. Now you can see the color variation as I bring that color back to life. And you can see on the fender, I mean, I'm using some pretty good soapy water, and there's streaks and handprints and discoloration all over this fender. And there was on the hood as well, but looking in the light, I don't see any sand scratch at all now, so the 5000 grit did take it all out, and it's just the perfect finish now to hit it with a buffer. I have completely sanded all of the car now with 1000, then 3000, and 5000 grit sandpapers. So I just want to show you the end result now. I've cleaned the car and wiped it all down. Before I started sanding, this area, it's real obvious, the discoloration, the Camaro emblem. You could see the script pretty drastic. You could see the halo around it. Underneath, the script was somewhat shiny from the original finish, and all around it was very dull and discolored. It had a real tannish color, to it and tone to it, with a lot of real ground-in dirt. So by sanding all that off now, you can see I didn't sand where the spoiler was. In the original finish, it has a pretty good gloss to it. And then as you get up into the finish where I've been sanding, there is a lot of sand scratch and swirl. But at least the color tone is there. And then you can see there are areas where I touched up. This had a huge chip and a little bit of a dent, and I just built it up with paint. Just kept putting in layer and layer and layer, and then sanded and buffed it by hand with the different sanding scratch again. And you can see it does show up. It is perfectly smooth. It's just some different colorations that in building up the paint with what other contaminants might end up getting into the paint as it's drying and curing and what's in the air. Some colors blend really well and disappear. There are other colors like this one that it is just almost impossible to completely hide without airbrushing those in. And then when you get into airbrushing with it getting a good bond and making a larger area discoloration, buffing through it, it's still difficult anytime you're having to fill a big chip. So some of the smaller chips do really well. Some of the larger chips don't do as well as this one is noticeable. But compared to the great big huge chip that was in there, as you walk around this car in a parking lot or at a car show, most people will never even see that, especially in the sunlight as you walk around a car like this. But color is consistent now, so it looks really good and it's ready to be buffed. As I look across this, there was a lot of chips right here. Those have blended in really nicely. So there's just some flowing of the paint and some inconsistencies of the edges of the chips where it's just not a perfect fix. But again, like I said, it's a huge improvement from the big chips that were here. It just made this car look like it needed a complete repaint. But again, you walk around the car now and you have to really look for it. And in the sun, it's really not going to be that noticeable. This area, the pinstripe was scraped off. There was some pretty heavy scrapes all along this ridge that was gouged all the way through the finish. That came out really nice. You have to really look closely to see that this pinstripe isn't exactly perfectly flowing all along. But with the age of this car and the finish and the pinstriping, it has flaws. It's not perfect. So it works really well with the age and the character of this car. And then when people start asking questions about how old is the finish and when was it painted, it's remarkable to be able to say this is a 35-year-old paint job. This area was very chipped up. This came out really nice. I thought for sure I was going to have to repaint the hood and this front panel because it was so bad. And again, if you look really, really close, you can see some slight marks. But when I color sanded, there's edges there that was in the paint that I can't cover up. But it just goes into that aged character of the car. Again, there was some heavy chipping along this edge. Those aren't showing up. Gaps look good now. That gap, this hood stuck way up about a ½ inch. So now we need to start buffing and getting rid of this sand scratch. You can see there's still, even after 5,000 grit sandpaper, you can still see some sand scratch. But I'm going to use a heavy wool pad to buff this, as well as a heavier compound, and then I'll step down to just real fine polishing compounds and a foam pad. I'll walk you through that, and hopefully this turns out really good, and you can work along with me, or I should say you can learn along with me, because I have not done this very many times. I think I've done it 4 times, and the first couple of times I really struggled. I didn't have good equipment. So now I have purchased a really nice Makita buffer, and we'll walk through doing this together. So as you can see behind me here, this is my next project. If you like watching somebody take a total loss, a salvage vehicle, and bring it back to life, get it back on the road again in its glory, this is a fairly new vehicle. It's barely a year old. It was only 7-8 months old when it was destroyed. So I'm really excited about this project. If you want to see what I'm doing, hit that post notification and subscribe, and you'll be alerted as I start working on this exciting new project.